Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Cohen and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Cohen to check in on the latest on the Trump reality show. How are we today, Steve?
I'm good, thanks. I mean, we've got something interesting to talk about. And maybe it's best if Trump stops talking about it too.
Well, it's an interesting comment to make because I think the reason why we keep coming back to these topics around Trump, because he does have a tendency to generate news and controversy and whatever. But what's fascinating is the next level or the next extent or the next angle that comes into play that really you got to stop and examine what's going on. Now, obviously, you'd never think that they could go any further, but they always find a new thing to do. And this whole thing with Rudy Giuliani over the last couple of days has just blown things into the stratosphere news-wise. Everyone's kind of hysterical on both ends. But leaving aside the noise, I guess, and if anyone doesn't know, for weeks, Trump saying, no, I don't know anything about this payment to Stormy Daniels. It was my lawyer. You got to talk to Michael Cohen about it. And then Rudy Giuliani goes on Hannity's Fox show and basically says, yeah, he repaid Michael the money. And it's you wonder what's going on with this, because there's two different aspects to this, and I think we've discussed this before, that Trump relies on, and his people rely on, this kind of bluster and PR method, if you want to call it that, to bulldoze their way through any issues that they're facing. And maybe when Trump was Mr. New York real estate mogul back in the 80s and 90s, it did work really well for him. He managed to get away with a lot of things, or whatever it was that he was doing.
Worked well on The Apprentice as well.
And The Apprentice, yeah, that's right, it worked really well there. But I think the thing that this week, what it highlighted, is that now they've generated visual, well, you don't call it evidence, but they've got two different videos. You can play them side by side and they contradict each other, and they did it themselves. It's not as if their enemies, the Trump haters, came out and did it. They did it themselves. And then there's a question of, now we're getting more into a legal aspect, which is all of the PR stuff, everything, all the antics he gets up to, all of that might work well in a PR perspective, with the public, sort of gaining, I guess, in the court of public opinion, for lack of a better word, he might be able to actually win that. But when you're going up against the feds and the prosecutors, the law, and all the legal traps that all of this sort of stuff sets up,
let's make no mistake, they are out to get him.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is he and his team aware that the tactics that work for them so well might actually be setting a huge trap and a huge, basically, bomb to go off in their camp, and it might blow up right in their face?
I think you're absolutely right, Ben, because what they've done is they fight a very good public relations campaign, and they just do it with a he said, she said mentality, and they lead the story. So traditionally what happens in these sorts of crisis times is, the regular modus operandi is that if you're involved, you try and shut the story down, you try and sequester it and keep it quiet. Whereas the Trump team just lead out, and they become more and more outrageous, and they set up the whole discussion, they set up the whole argument, they divert the original claims to outrageous claims which they start, and that weakens the entire argument until it just becomes noise. What's interesting about this is, as you say, this is a very legal area, and there are people who have to get him on this. I mean, it's a technicality, but if he breaches a technicality, he's exposed to the law. And I think what's happened is that they're trying to lead this discussion as they would the public relations side of this. But this is a legal issue, and I think they're leading it. And I think the biggest problem is something you pointed out a bit earlier and might want to say something about, but they're the sole voice. So they're actually working against themselves at the moment.
Well, just on that point, so this is really sort of circling around the Stormy Daniels case. And we said before we got on that this story probably would have died pretty quickly if they hadn't said anything. All he needed to do was keep his mouth shut. All of his people needed to keep his mouth shut. They didn't even need to make attempts to try and squash it. But no, he keeps jumping in and he keeps stoking it so it keeps coming back in. And the Giuliani thing is just another example of that, the stoking of the story. So then you get this ridiculous situation where you got the Stormy Daniels lawyer going all over the media saying, please, President, show up on Fox and Friends and bare your soul. We need more of this. It's going to help us so much. And he he gets on these shows, this lawyer, and he keeps saying, this is like Christmas every day for me. The more he speaks, the more he's giving me to work with. And and to the point where he's saying, I'm playing three-dimensional chess and they're playing tic-tac-toe. And he couldn't work out, like he was, and I think this is where the crux of it. And again, you wonder, is it deliberate or whether is it accidental? And the Stormy Daniels lawyer said that he was expecting a lot more resistance and a lot more clever tactics than what he's seeing.
Well, that's right, because he's used to a legal battle. And Trump's group, as we've said, are running a PR battle. And, I don't know, maybe there's an explanation to it as simple as Trump wants the whole world to know that he had a relationship with Stormy Daniels. I don't know. He just keeps bringing it up so we can't forget.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Maybe
he denies that it ever happened, or then he denies that he ever paid for it to, not to have happened or something.
Exactly. There was an actual something a bit more broader and a bit more darker, an aspect to this that I saw playing out in the news this week, that the potential of, again, we go back to this PR battle and the idea that maybe he's seeing where this is going and that they're out, like you said, they're out to get him, and maybe according to him, there's a really good chance that they are going to get him in the next little while with whatever it is that they're going with. And he's starting to do this to stoke up that much resentment and that much fire in his base that there'll be a revolt, basically, if any of these guys try to bring anything against him. What do you reckon about that?
Well, that's, look, Trump is a tactician, and it could be a tic-tac-toe-tician, or maybe it is a three-dimensional chess-tician. I don't know. Look, maybe there's something even bigger on him that they could get him on, in which case he's smart enough to know that he'd just go after this small feed, because I really think at the end of the day, it would be very hard, unless there's, some sort of really hard evidence, that he used campaign funds. There's only an inference he used campaign funds. But, I don't know. If there was something bigger you had to hide, well, maybe this is the story you would make it all about, because it kind of seems irrelevant.
But the thing is, Giuliani went on TV and literally said that this is what it was for, in so many words.
Rudy's a great guy.
He's got to get his facts straight.
He's got to learn the facts. We've all started work and probably made a few errors in the first few days at work, so maybe Rudy's done the same thing.
That's a hell of an error, I can tell you that much.
Damn straight for your legal team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, we'll go back to another angle of looking at this, and which is the way the media is jumping all over it now. Maybe, I don't know would we be expecting them to do anything different? I would think that they would be covering this. Would they be covering it any different? I don't know.
There's Trump, and then there's social media, modern social media. And the one thing that Trump has done is probably actually put real value into social media in the last couple of years. He's attracting people to social media. He's conducting business and politics on social media. He's given social media some real meaning, and the traditional media has really hooked onto social media as part of their survival. So there's something that, probably 2 or 3 years ago, even if Trump was in then, maybe it wouldn't have been like it is now. But the cycle has gone berserk, largely thanks to Trump, but everybody's playing. So
in other words, the say like CNN, MSNBC, whoever they are, they've got like rolling coverage almost 24/7. It feels like. You feel like in this media environment, they've got no choice but to do that. Whereas in the past, they might have saved it for the nightly news kind of thing.
Well, yeah, but also social media has changed everything. So let's go back to when Michael Moore, back in the 2000s, when Michael Moore, went after W.
Yeah.
And that was pre-smartphone. And really, even though everyone felt that way about perhaps some aspects of the George W. Bush presidency, their lone voice was Michael Moore and his documentaries. And, the thing is that now with social media and everyone with a smartphone in their hand, it's just everyone's saying it all at once. I mean, you can't even hear Michael Moore anymore. Yeah. because of the million voices screaming louder than him. So, I think this is actually what needs to be studied. Whatever Trump is, I think we largely know what sort of guy he is. And I think we largely know what he's been up to as well.
Yeah.
But I think what's happening in social media is not one-sided anymore. We've spoken about this many times. The fact is that social media largely is a two-way, really democratized voice, even if it is just noise, or even if the screens just become noise. And that feeds a cycle. It feeds an emotional response, the likes of we've never seen before on the planet. It's group consciousness
gone mad,
doing itself up at once. Yeah. And we're part of it now, even just with this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to finish on just bringing back the legal aspect, and we'll talk about Twitter itself, because that's obviously Trump's preferred medium of social medium of choice, shall we say. That all of this, because he's been doing a lot of tweeting as well, and making a whole bunch of statements. Are these tweet statements, are these written things that could be used against him in a court of law? Can the feds come in and say, look, you said this, you said that? Is that defamation? Is, all of this sort of stuff? Is it possible that we're looking at the first real Twitter, law storm or whatever, that could really test we've had instances of where people have gotten into trouble on Twitter before, but I'm wondering is this the big one that we're looking at? What you're talking
about now is Twitter, effectively. It's Twitter Gammon, get 'em, or whatever it is. So back in 2012, when we first started talking about Twitter and that sort of thing on our previous podcasts, Twitter was seen as a publishing platform and you could defame people. And, of course, like all new things, the social media lawyers were all over it. The defamation people were all over it. And they loved it, for more work, Yeah. As Twitter lost popularity probably from about 2015 on, there's been a loss of interest in Twitter. But social media has legally, for probably the larger part of its existence, been deemed a publishing platform. Therefore, defamation comes into play if someone feels they've been defamed. Interestingly, though, Trump makes so many outrageous comments on Twitter that I think any sane judge would just have to dismiss them
all of it
because they're inconsistent largely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just plain crazy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there, and I'm sure we'll return to Trump. We'll see what next week's installment brings us, really. That's the way it's gotten to it now.
It brings all a lot of joy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our channels, YouTube, Vimeo, our RSS feed, so you can listen to us on your devices, etc. And hope you enjoy all the content we've got there. We greatly appreciate your visits there. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.